Five, four, three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Art of Move podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar. We are still out here in the Canadian Rockies trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement, biomechanics, functional fitness, and how you should live in your body as a human being and enjoy it. Basically, how should you move? How should you live? What's the lifestyle? What are the mechanics involved? What's going on? We're going to do a little bit of a freestyle episode for you. There's a few recap points that we wanted to kind of cover, do maybe even a revisiting of some concepts that we covered in previous episodes, but kind of give more insight in terms of how we understand them a little bit differently, how we understand them in the context of our own personal practice, experience, and even application. A lot of this stuff I realized when I was listening back to some of the older episodes, a lot of this stuff was still conceptual to me. I hadn't really dove into it very deeply. I hadn't applied a lot of it. I was in the exploratory phase, right? And our podcast is now a year old. So listening back to, a year ago in terms of our understanding back then, both Will and I have a much more in-depth practical experience with some of these concepts, including spinal engine, including go to principles like inside ankle bone high and back chain dominance, including, the different ways, the different applications of these concepts essentially. So we're going to do a little bit of a recap and maybe even say how our perspectives have evolved in terms of how our practical application of these things have influenced our understanding of them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to it, right? A lot of these concepts. Maybe we can start with Spinal Engine and a little bit of a recap on how I came about it. Basically, I came about it through school, and it was the concept of bracing the core and core brace from Stu McGill, right? So the spine is supposed to stay nice and neutral as you move about in space. The legs are doing the work, the spine is remaining neutral, and that's that, right? So a lot of the training concepts like brace the core and core stability, I still don't know what stability means, right? So core stability is how you're supposed to do things. So that gives you things like the pull-off press, exercises like the pull-off press, like crawling, or I shouldn't even say crawling. One I saw the other day was you have 2 feet on a sliding disc and you're just walking and your feet are slithering. It's like it brings you exercises where your core remains stiff. Okay, so that's how I came about core brace, and head over foot was the consequence of me looking at Spinal Engine from Serge Gregakevsky, which is the concept that instead of you standing neutral, straight, your spine is actually supposed to wave back and forth like a pressure wave, kind of like any animal that you see will go back and forth, right? Obviously, some other people come about it from a different angle. They'd never heard about it. So a lot of people see Weck doing his version of Spinal Engine, and it's, the landmine and a deep side bend. And they're like, no. Yeah, coiling the core stuff. And people are like, no, that's too much of an exaggeration. That's not what you do. But the original argument for me was Spinal Engine versus brace the core. Mm-hmm. And to me, Spinal Engine makes so much more sense. How you apply it, that can be, we can debate about that. However, I do believe that the spine moves back and forth as a natural pressure wave, which is what Goda calls it, right? A pressure wave. Weck calls it coiling the core. I believe Functional Patterns does it as well. I don't know if they have a name for it. But it's basically the fact that you can let your body go and the body moves on its own in that pressure wave, okay? So I ditch stability as it's known or as it's applied to the actual exercises, and I let my body actually relax. To me, neurologically, that's a lot better. I can literally relax my body as I move through space, and the body just does its own thing through its attributes, through the attribute of, the thoracolumbar fascia in the back, my intention. I did practice head over foot as a behavioral modification because I can use it in boxing. I can use it for balance, right? So I came about it, Spinal Engine, through as an opposition to brace the core. So it's a very interesting concept because people come about it in a very different way.
So I have a few thoughts just right off the get-go. You
Yeah.
said I don't know what the definition of stability is, right? And so for me, how I've been conceptualizing stability lately as people are using it in their Instagram posts and when they're talking about stability in a general fitness context, stability to me means resisting deformation in the face of dynamic forces or the ability to return to a neutral position after being deformed from a dynamic position, right? And so the core idea to me is this idea that like like you might experience like a spinal bend as a result of these spiraling dynamic or lateral bending forces that you experience during locomotion, but your core stability is the ability to bounce you back into the middle. So I think there is a level of core stability that happens within locomotion. I'm not denying, but spinal engine happens as a result of these dynamic forces. Your core stability is not a matter of you bracing the core. It's more when you're talking about the attributes of fascia, that elasticity of the thoracolumbar fascia, bouncing you and creating this reciprocal exchange of energy back and forth. That to me is dynamic core stability, right? And so core stability, the way that people think about it is like you said, they're doing these pow-off presses. They think that by bracing and flexing and contracting their core, they're developing these attributes of being able to return to that center line. And then they misinterpret that by when they're dynamically running, they're trying to keep their head in the center and they're trying to resist this natural waving action of the spine. The issue is you become much less energy efficient and you rely much more on muscular contraction to locomote yourself forward. When you are exchanging this energy reciprocally, you have this free exchange of elastic energy, and you don't have to burn as many calories by contracting your muscles. You're not burning glucose, squeezing your muscles like constantly. The proprioception, all the nervous system inputs you have from the lengthening of the fascial tissue will basically sequence the firing of your muscles to bounce you back and forth appropriately, and you're using that elastic energy and that stored elastic energy. So for me, stability is defined usually in terms of like how hard can you brace, how hard can you resist these forces. But for me, I think it's just, do you have the ability to return to this neutral position after you've been extended or compressed by dynamic forces? So that's kind of how I started thinking about it a little differently.
Well, I love all that except for returning to neutral, because as you're moving, you never really return to neutral. You keep going, right? So I get what you're saying, to return the elastic energy so that it goes back to its original form. Okay. But again, as you're dynamically moving, you're never really returning to a neutral. Where is the neutral? Where is the stability, right? So here's another issue is that we're making up new language now, because stability, like you said, is a brace. When people use it in the fitness industry, I don't ever hear anybody talking about returning to neutral from a snapback. I would call that more dynamic stability in my own language, but that's not the language that the fitness industry is using it.
No.
I'm not seeing anyone define it that way. And when I ask people, it's a question that isn't really answered anywhere or doesn't want to even be approached, because you can observe it. You can observe people moving back and forth. And what people always want to go back to is 100-meter sprinters who can stay neutral, like quote unquote neutral, and still run really fast in a straight line. Okay. So since they're the fastest, since they're the most athletic, then we're doing it correctly by stiffening up the midsection. But if they have to take a turn, if they have to do multiple movements, then it kind of all falls apart. Right. And I look at it more in a tensegrity. So, that original, what you said, snapping back to neutral. Mm-hmm. Well, it's really just harnessing the tensegrity, the elastic tension of your whole system to be able to harness that energy to move it to the other side. I like Goda's 2-column system approach, where you're going from column to column with your spine. Okay. The column being shoulder, hip, ankle on one side, on both sides, and your head is moving back and forth, and your spine is doing a wave back and forth between the columns. So imagine 2 tornadoes up the side of your body on both sides, and your head and your spine are passing back and forth between the two as you're moving through space. And as your head goes over your foot, when you're on one side, to me, that is head over foot. There's your, WEC head over foot, whatever you want to call it. To me, I can obviously see a spinal engine in long distance runners where they have to be efficient. and they can't rely on so much muscular effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I want to. I'm just pulling up a video here of Tom Myers holding a tensegrity structure and how it can actually illustrate what you mean by how it could create this sense of stability, right? Like when I'm talking about this ability to resist deformation in the force of like in the light of dynamic forces, it'll return to its original structure, right? And so when you're saying, well, where does it return to the original structure in movement? It's like, well, if you're landing and you're bouncing back, then it's more when you stop. Do you naturally return? Is there a center point? Is there a natural tensegrity balance point that you return to? So that's what stability is kind of defined to as, for me, you can kind of see there are these struts and strands here that are creating this structure. And when you pull on it and you yank on it, the other parts of the structure remain stable, but then when he releases it, it just returns to this balanced center point here, right? And you can really like that's how I visualize it in terms of like stability to me is tensegrity, right? And that's obviously not the way that people are defining it within the fitness industry, but I'm talking about when in terms of practical application of things. I feel like my body is naturally supported when I'm sitting, when I'm standing, when I'm in a resting posture. And then dynamically, I will feel that sort of extension or contraction, and I will feel my body naturally start to want to bounce back to that center point. Now, the thing is, like if you're talking about this reciprocal side to side action, obviously there's a point like if you hit like a doorstop, like Devin from One of a Kind Fitness uses the doorstop as sort of a visual representation of the attribute of tensegrity, as far as I understand. And you can see it bounce back and forth, but slowly return back to the center as the movement or as the dynamic forces decline, right? So for me, the return to the center point is when movement stops, but there is this sort of point where it's like you reach a certain level of tension and deformation and it kind of bounces you back towards the center point, but there's still going to be another dynamic force that moves you past it, and then you continue that reciprocal energy back and forth. Does that make sense? I'm trying to articulate this well. I don't know if I'm doing it.
It does. Yeah, that all makes sense. And I like it, except that I'd add, in my personal opinion, it's a figure eight when you're going
Right.
like, it's not just a side bend, then you bounce back, right? There's a circular momentum to what you're doing. And I can't remember who put it up on Instagram. I might have to find it, but it's basically you put lights on your shoulders and you put lights on the hips and you see what's happening. And as the person goes forward in a long exposure photography, basically it looks like a 8 going forward. Okay. It's like an actual circle going forward. But when you're watching, it's just, it kind of, especially from the side, it just looks like you're going up and down and bouncing your head back and forth. From the front, it looks like a wave side to side. But when you add the two, there's a circular pattern happening, a figure eight. I think this happens all over your body. Okay. So that's a personal opinion, and one that I can actually show in observation, but it has to be a very, very like particular way that I'm going to show it. I don't have that to pull up right now, but either way, I know that there's a figure eight pattern that happens that is a expression of the attributes of your tensegrity if you're healthy. Now, another caveat to that is when someone mentions stability of a joint, okay, that also is returning to neutral, right? So I can see that one being more of a returning to neutral, because I think people now look at stability like, let's say the shoulder. Are your rotator cuff muscles holding the ball in the middle of the socket as you move? That's what the fitness industry would say is shoulder stability, and same with hip stability. Are your hip muscles, the piriformis and the glomellae, are they holding in the glute med? Is it holding the middle of the socket still? And I also had a debates class discussion with somebody the other day who was talking about your glute med. It's basically like a skeleton with a glute med only. And it's like, look, if you work your glute med, your hip will be stable. It's like, that is such a reductionist approach to it. Takes out all the fascia. It's just like, this glute med, do a monster walk and you're going to be good. You're going to be stable. It's really not like that. It's returning it to neutral. So I see you on this one, on individual joints. On the whole body, we're talking figure eight, we're talking pressure wave. And yeah, it's all super interesting, right? It's a lot more nuanced than just single muscles holding joints.
I'm trying to find. You sent me a post by Ben Yanes a while ago where he was defining it like something about redefining stability. I'm gonna pull this up and we can kind of
Sure.
maybe pivot off this a little bit because I thought this was like a bit of a funny take here. Internal stability is our ability to create contraction from different muscles around a joint so that the joint moves properly. An example of this is how the rotator cuff collectively resists the upward pull of the deltoid when the arm is raised up and out to the side.
Okay. Do you have any comment on that one?
I would like to hear your take on it first, right? External
Okay.
stability. I'm going to go through the whole post and then we
Sure.
can kind of pivot off of it.
Sure.
External stability refers to the physical constraints around us during exercise. The less energy we have to expend on trying to keep ourselves in the same place, the more energy we can put into every set and rep of an exercise. This is kind of interesting because this is along the same lines of kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about dynamic stability, right? It's the less energy that we have to expend on keeping ourselves not the difference is I'm not saying that you have to keep yourself in the same place. It's the less energy that you have to expend on the transference of energy to to locomote yourself forward or to dynamically move yourself through space. It's how efficiently can you transfer the energy, like you said, through a pressure wave or through an efficient transfer of energy without any loss or excessive contraction or jarring experiences, right? So he has the internal and external stability definitions. What are your thoughts right off the get go?
Right off the get-go, my thoughts are the paradigm is lifting and exercise, where my paradigm is movement and energy flow. So the paradigms don't match. And let's look at this one. Internal stability. Can you go back to that?
Yeah.
Internal stability is our ability to create contraction. We don't create contraction when we run or move or anything like that. You're not purposely firing.
Right?
Yeah, you're not purposely consciously firing anything. Okay, it's just going to happen. Now, a lot of the I know what are the IKN and PRI, perhaps maybe I'm strawmanning them, but they do the co-contractions where they're like, if you co-contract this, let's say you're laying on the ground and you put your foot on a what is it called, a foam roller, and you lift your butt, your hamstring is going to contract. Okay, so they try to create co-contraction so that you do it in real life motion. I don't think that transfers over very well to from being on the floor to actual motions, right? So you're never going to be able to purposely contract muscles. You don't actually want to purposely contract muscles if you want to be fluid and efficient. I don't ever, when I'm moving fast, when I'm moving dynamically, want to purposely contract a muscle other than to stop and start. And I'm never thinking contract this muscle. I'm thinking of harnessing energy and redirecting it. Okay, so again, this is a barbell exercise model. How would somebody create a contraction from different muscles around a joint? How would that go?
The example that I kind of think of is like creating stability in a handstand, for example, or like when you're walking on a slack line, right? And I think of like, okay, you're learning this sort of proprioceptive feedback or this balance feedback where you kind of have to teach your body to create tensions and stability to resist falling, right? And you're learning where your center of gravity is and you're creating forces to prevent you from moving in a particular direction. And so stability is how you create balance in these situations. That's the only situation where, when he's talking about the rotator cuff collectively resisting different pulls from the deltoid, it's like if you're standing on your hands, you need to have the ability to push yourself in different directions to find a certain balance point, right? And so that's one example that I could think of where this might apply. What are your thoughts on that?
One that would be external, right? I believe. So the internal is actually in the joint, contracting your rotator cuff muscle. So most physios will have you just doing the band external rotation, hoping that will transfer over into real life. The classic, I hold the band and I'm standing there like a robot and moving my arms to the side. Hopefully that will make the rotator cuffs contract like that in real life motion. They don't, by the way. Okay. So the thing is, you have to work with your tensegrity. You have to work with the ability for your body to know where it is in space. That's a more important part, to know where your tensions actually start. So let's say I'm a really tight bodybuilder and I go for a punch. I'm not going to be able to reach back like this, or, reach to the side, or have a huge range of motion. So I'm not going to be stable in those positions if I go. You're going to see my body contract and tighten up, right? So that there would be a subconscious contraction, and you probably wouldn't go there anyway, right? So you have to know where your body is in space in order to use it properly. This is not conscious, other than maybe when you're practicing it, but to use your attributes consciously in movement just doesn't happen. So I really don't see where this works other than in the gym. And show me where this actually works. Like I want some proof in other than a paper. You might have a paper that says, okay, if I band rotate, I might take 10 soccer players or volleyball players, and they might have less injuries at the end of the year or something like that, right? That might be your proof. But to me, it makes a lot more sense. We're using our tensegrity, we're using our fascia, we're using the elastic properties of our body. And that's what will dictate subconsciously when your muscles will contract.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're looking for context, I mean, even Ben just put in his hashtags free weights, machines, bodybuilding, and hypertrophy. So I guess that's the context that he's talking about. If, like you said, it's a lifting lens, right? So this definition of stability is still within that paradigm of lifting, and it makes sense in a lifting context, right? If you want your like if you're doing a dumbbell bench press, you don't want the weights to go all over the place. You want to be able to stabilize it and make it move in a particular path without it going in different directions and stuff. So, that's the quote movement context that you would look at. But when you're looking at actual movement and the dynamic forces involved in that, then I don't really know where that would necessarily apply. So interesting, different definitions of stability that we're exploring here.
Wait, can we go to external stability there?
Yeah, for sure. 1 second. We'll just pull that right back up here. And for those who are watching on Spotify or iTunes, we do have these replays on YouTube as well, and you can check them out on my vault on nofilter.net. So external stability, referring to the physical constraints around us during exercise. The less energy we have to expend on trying to keep ourselves in the same place, the more energy we put into every set and every rep of an exercise. Barbell squats, for instance, do not provide much external stability. A more efficient solution for training the quads may be using a hack squat for this reason.
Yeah, again, we're talking the paradigm of exercise. He even puts it in here: exercise and reps and sets. And that happens only in the gym. Like, we're going to the gym to do exercise and reps and sets, but in real life, and that's fine. If that's what you're doing, then maybe this applies a little bit more. But when we're talking movement, this kind of all goes out the window, right? Like, external stability. I would have to say that's your ability to read the environment, again, through your neurology, through your attributes of your body, and let's just say, let's put in something that I see all the time at the office: somebody injured. Let's say your hip's injured. You're not going to be stable anymore because of your neurological system is not going to allow you to not going to allow you to use your attributes. Let's say you have great fascia in your glutes and great muscles, and normally you would have great proprioception feedback to where you are in space. You're still not going to be able to use it because your hip's injured. So stability goes out the window there, right? As I'm kind of defining it in a dynamic way. So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, even in a lifting context, this comment I found kind of interesting. Someone with a 500-pound squat can leg press 10 plates, but someone that can leg press 10 plates can't necessarily squat 500 pounds. And again, you see the limitations even within a lifting context of the more that you constrain the isolation of the body and train specific muscle groups, the less dynamically you can apply it. You could easily argue that a back squat or even a goblet squat is a more dynamic, stability requiring, or like a dynamic expression of a movement where there are less constraints on your body and you're less isolating. And the more that you isolate it, the less carryover it has to more dynamic movements. So even in this fixed plane movement of a barbell squat, it doesn't have the same application to, say, a sprint as some of these more spiral dynamic motions that you could load might possibly have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And even, squatting and let's say leg pressing, those are both made up. Okay. Like the barbell was made 70 years ago or 100 years ago. It's a new invention. Those are both made up exercises. They have very little to do with movement. And if I'm really a stability denier in the context of like Stu McGill and how these guys define it, because if it was true, powerlifters would be the most stable people and they would move very well. They can't move very well. They can only do stability in lifting. So at some point, the stability from lifting is very specialized to lifting. We're trying to figure out what point that is. I think it's very, very, very quick. Because there's not much transfer over. There may be ways to do it, like the way that Goda does it with a bow, the way that Weck does it, with Landmine University, the way that OKF does it with his internal rotation. Those are a lot more intelligent ways to go about it than just let's go up and down with this weight, and then I'm more stable afterwards. Again, powerlifters would be the most stable human beings on the planet. So would Olympic lifters. Are Olympic lifters able to cut and run and move and be athletic outside Olympic lifting? I don't know. I don't think so. They can jump high and they can move fast explosively in a short.
They can jump high and backflip, but that's about the constraint. We have an interesting comment here. I wouldn't consider PRI as training and consider it more as a tool for recovery. This is from Anne, and also just pointing out that she just joined and didn't have the context necessarily. But I'd be kind of curious, when you say recovery tool, recovery for what? Recovery from more specific training, or recovery from another form of lifting or a dynamic exercise? Like what context are you recovering from, and how does PRI specifically help you recover in a more effective or efficient way that translates to movement, right? We don't know a ton about PRI. We're going to get someone on pretty soon in the next couple of weeks who has a lot more experience in the system and has been coaching the system for a while. It's been on our to-do list. So we have someone kind of in our pipeline to talk more specifically about PRI soon, but I'm really curious what you mean by recovery. So yeah, do you want to move on from the stability thing is kind of interesting, because obviously you and I have a different definition as it pertains to dynamic stability, and Anna's just saying recovery from the extension demands of training. So that's kind of interesting.
Extension demands of training. I mean, let's talk more specifically with a PRI practitioner, because I'm probably straw manning a lot of what they're saying, so I don't want to continue with that. Extension, I mean, where, what, when, there's a lot to it. It's not just flexion extension, and that goes along the lines of what we were going to talk about with front chain, back chain, right? Do you want to move on to that with the conversation we were having before the podcast, or did you have something else in mind?
Yeah, we could talk a little bit about that. So do you want to give me a point to pivot off of? What specifically did you want me to tackle?
Yeah, so with front chain, back chain, okay, so I look at the 80-20 as having your hips behind your ribs as you move through space, and that automatically will get the back chain of your body, the muscles in the back, to lengthen, okay? And you can see this, like if you keep putting your hips back like a deadlift, at some point your back muscles will turn on, and that will be where your fascia starts to tighten up and your muscles start to work. Okay, so at some point that becomes true. Now I think it's just having your butt behind your ribs to a small degree, and this isn't taking tilt into account yet. Okay, because a lot of people conflate the two. They're like, back chain means you have to have a Donald Duck butt at all time, right? It doesn't mean that. It just means hips behind ribs as a couple inches as a baseline, okay? And that means you'll be tighter in the back than you are in the front, okay? And you can see this, like, exaggerate the hips in front of your body and you'll see your abs start to work. Not your ab muscles, but the front of your body will tighten up, okay? So in either direction, you're going to tighten the fascia, the connective tissue of, if your hips are way in front, the front chain of your body, or as I would call it, and if your butt goes back, your back goes forward like a hip hinge, it's going to be the back of your body. Now, and a major exaggeration of this is, imagine an Atlas stone, picking it up. You bend over, you pick up the Atlas stone, you wrap your arms around it. The fascia, the skin of your back even, is going to tighten up to the max. And you're using the attributes of the fascia of your back, the actual like strength of the fascia, which is, very, very, very strong, to help you with the lift. And you're contracting your muscles too, right? They're not always separate. And vice versa on a Russian twist. Like, let's say you're on a GHD machine or a back extension machine, you're faced forward and you're Russian twisting with let's say a 45-pound barbell, which would be an insane Russian twist, right? But let's say you're doing that. You would know that the front of your body would just be lit up to the max, and your fascia is going to be helping you to hold that up, and the muscles are going to be contracting. So that's just a little bit of a nuance to front chain, back chain. Either one does not mean the other isn't working at all, though. Right? So if I'm back chain, if I put my hips behind my ribs, it doesn't mean that automatically that the front of my body just shuts off.
No.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's still things happening in the front of the body. And I feel like a lot of people miss this point, that if you use your back chain, it means the front chain is it's gone now, right? That's why Goda says back chain dominant, because it's doing most of the work. And that's where I want to be most of the time personally when I'm moving through space.
Yeah, and to me, the expression of back chain dominance, it kind of made me aware that, like, if I'm tilting my hips back even by a couple of degrees behind my rib cage, I have more access to kind of corkscrew into my hips, get some of that internal rotation, and again, create a certain level of elastic stretch within those posterior chain muscles, the glutes, the hamstrings, those things that I want to use to propel myself forward. I have more access to the elastic qualities of my posterior chain when I'm just in that position, because I'm more extended in that position. That elastic chain is stretched out a little bit. So when I move dynamically, I'm stretching and I'm taking advantage of that elastic recoil effect, right? So that's all I feel, with the back chain, front chain thing. One of the things that came up for me is, if you have a history of, like, even doing Russian twists, or doing, like, you and I did a ton of CrossFit. I did a lot of GHD sit-ups with a heavy medicine ball, and I did a lot of this crunching action. So I compressed that entire anterior chain. I wanted to get the sick fucking rectus abdominis muscles for the six pack and stuff, and my serratus anterior super super tight from all the front lever work and all of the compressing my lats down to stabilize myself during a deadlift. So I really compressed that entire anterior chain. Is going to be standing in your back chain and practicing that with that amount of tension, and practicing that, is that going to be enough to open the front chain and allow yourself to have access to it? Is it going to help you naturally relax it and get those deep diaphragmatic breaths and to access that spinal engine? Or is it better to have an applied approach, maybe do some exercises where you're stretching, you're doing myofascial release, you're getting into exaggerated versions of movement to open up that front chain, and then that way you can have better access to that back chain? Because again, if you have a contracted front chain, you're not going to have maybe the decompression effect that you want to have by being in the back chain. It's not, if you think about how much tension and how much neural input you put over years of lifting and doing crunches and all this stuff, and you're compressing that anterior chain, is just standing in your back chain enough to open it up? I actually don't think it is. That's why I've been doing a lot more myofascial release. I've been doing some work with Adrian Fino and specifically opening up my serratus anterior and doing things like the Eldoa method, where I'm trying to open up that entire area and gain access. And what I'm finding is, by opening my anterior chain, my back chain dominance, or my back chain activation, that tension in that back chain is actually more fluid. It has more control. I can actually access my hips even a lot more by opening up around the pecs, lats, serratus, the rectus abdominis, all those like the obliques that are overly tight. I don't have that same that air pump effect when I laterally bend. It's made the expression of the back chain a lot better. So one of the things that Goda talks about a lot is just, work in the math, work in the math, work in the math. Don't do anything outside of the math. And what I'm finding is, well, that's great, but it's not enough, because the neural inputs and the tissue inputs that I had over years of lifting and gymnastics and incorrect mechanical inputs that have imbalanced my structure have required me to do a lot more specific work, and that's not always just, quote, in the math.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff because being in the math is like stopping the bleeding to me, right? So it's a starting point, and it's definitely a, I stick to it, 80/20, definitely, right? With my movements, but what you're speaking of to me is more, it's very individual. You have to see where you're at, right? Most people are stuck in the quote unquote front chain from doing so much work, especially, how many guys do you see walk around crunching their abs at all times at a low level just to, especially with the shirt off, getting those ab muscles to show? I actually want my ab muscles elongated now, which doesn't lend to having a quote unquote cultural six pack, right? Like the six pack that everyone wants. But for years, I contracted that area at a higher level than I naturally should because I thought that would get my abs popping, right? So that may have been on an extreme level, but I think people do this, want to shorten their midsection in order to make it slimmer for one reason or another. Now, again, I think it's very individual. You have to see where you're at, what is tight, what is not tight. Being in the quote unquote math is a starting point and is stopping the bleeding. But yes, you can definitely go farther. You can lengthen tissues in very particular ways. You can work on your nervous system relaxation. This goes to the emotional points of things. Sometimes you're holding tension emotionally, especially in the midsection. People are holding their tensions during the day. They're stopping themselves from breathing fully and just letting the air go and relax. That to me is a huge one because you're breathing all the time. Most people are holding their breath somewhat in the sympathetic state during the day, just your job, your life, from doing all the exercises that you said before. Most people are stuck in that tissue in the front and doesn't allow for length in the back. Now, a lot of what I do is I do a lot of the stretching that you said, a lot of like very, very lengthening type stretching. This is one thing I actually liked CrossFit for was, the, what are they called? Kipping pull-ups. I use them now just on a tree for lengthening as much as I can and just feeling out the elasticity, right? Not so much doing the pull-up, just feeling the elasticity happen. I can feel the tension closer to where my abs attach into my pubis bone, right? So I can feel tension there and I can work it out during the day just a little by little, right? So, and then there's the neurological aspect that you mentioned, which is to me, I can shake out. I do a lot of shaking and just like letting my body loose, very, very loose. The more and the easier I can shake, the more I can let the nervous system tension go. And it's like a feedback thing, right? It's kind of like breathing belly breath, not belly breath, but breathing through your nose in a slow, controlled fashion. It's hard to be amped up if you can do that, and vice versa, right? So it's hard to be really amped up during the day and nose breathe and relax. Okay, they don't go together. So the same thing goes with shaking. If I can allow the energy to flow quickly, it dissipates through that area. Then there's the mechanical tension that you mentioned. For me, I do high pressure cupping in the ribs. That's not available to everybody. So stretching, specific work on whatever you need. That's where a coach comes in who knows this type of stuff. Yeah. Did you have anything to add to that one?
I actually had a funny story about the whole kipping thing because usually when you're doing a good kip, right, you have that whole front line open up and you're relying on that elastic snapback. At my very first CrossFit competition ever, one of the events had toes to bar as one of the exercises. And the movement standard was that your feet had to go behind your hips. My front line was so compressed that when I went down to kip, my feet didn't go behind my hips. I got no rep like 20 times. So I had to like aggressively kick my legs behind just so that because again, my rectus abdominis was so tight, I actually couldn't open up. I couldn't open up my lats, my serratus. I literally couldn't open up to that point to get that elastic tension because my elastic tension was like at about just a neutral standing point. I was so compressed in the front chain. And I just find it so funny now, like the thought of that, like the idea of being able to do a yoga back bend, for example, was never in a million years on my radar, right? Like it was just something that was like there's no way. Like I get to here and then I'm stuck, right? Like it was just like this was my max overhead reach. Now I have quite a bit more range, but I couldn't actually open up my front line enough, and I got no reps like 15 times. It drove me nuts. I lost the event because of it.
It's pretty funny because you can use, like, even in CrossFit, let's say you do have a tight front line and you're doing those kipping pull-ups, that actually gives you more of an elastic bounce back to kick your feet up and touch the bar on, like, let's say a toes to bar, right? So you can use the attributes in CrossFit, certain tight areas, to your advantage. But again, those aren't really, like, I know CrossFit's supposed to be functional, but when is toes to bar repetitively 50 times actually functional? That's just not, it doesn't go with what happens in real life. So yeah, it's a funny thing, right? Like CrossFit is it gives you a lot of skills, but I don't know if you use almost any of the skills in real life motions, right? So I became like good at most of the CrossFit movements. I used to watch the Kelly Starrett's, he'd perfect every movement to the max. And it's like, now I use none of these almost, right? Like I completely switched the way I do things. So it was almost, I wouldn't say I threw away a lot of energy, but it is almost like that, right? Um, anyway, I digress. Back to what we were saying. One more thing, there's more than just the front chain, back chain. Okay. Those are really simplified ways to parse out what is tightening up and what's not. But there's way more to it when you actually go into the nuances. You can get an 80-20 right off the get-go if somebody doesn't know this stuff, right? So I think even high-level coaches have no idea about this. You'll see a lot of the fitness industry not even understanding what this is whatsoever. But when you look at it, in the, let's say, Tom Myers lines, even though I don't use them, there's spiral lines, there's lateral lines, there's, all of them are being used at all times to just what degree, how tight they are, how much contraction you're using versus the other side, or there's a lot to it. But to simplify things, I like the way that Goda did it. It's like front chain, back chain. You're going to get your 80-20 there. Then you really have to figure it out from there. What's stopping you neurologically and mechanically from gaining the ease into movements from there?
I think that concept of ease is not something that is natural to a lot of people. We have this sort of yang energy, this sort of masculine approach to like, let's push, let's force our bodies to do these things, and we get stronger. And, again, like with lifting for its own sake, it's you push weights so that you can push more weights, so that you can push more weights, and you get bigger and stronger and ideally faster. But the faster part is is up for debate if you're getting faster by lifting weights and stuff. But this approach of how can you actually create more ease in your movement, that's a paradigm shift in and of itself, right? Like for me, this idea of being in a more parasympathetic state, letting my body not be in tension all the time, because that was, again, even like my background in powerlifting, I was heavily influenced by the Russian strength coach, Pavel Tsautsilin, and he talked about greasing the groove a lot. So it was always about strength is the skill of producing tension so that you can generate more force. So if you produce more tension throughout the day, to deadlift more, I would engage my lats and squeeze, and I would like practice this high tension deadlifting pattern in the middle of the day, not lifting an actual barbell, so that when I was ready to go lift a barbell, I could just turn it on. But the problem was I never practiced turning it off. I never practiced ease. Ease was never part of my practice. Release and surrender and this letting go element, that was never part of my practice. Maybe I did a little bit of foam rolling, but even the foam rolling was this aggressive thing where I'm like, yeah, like dig into the tissues, force it to relax, force it to let go. There was never this like releasing element. And so this paradigm, when we started getting into the biomechanics stuff, when I started learning about Goda and I started learning about, again, an efficient transfer of energy, it first of all, it annoyed me that I'd never thought on that angle. I thought I was like this sophisticated strength coach who thought of everything about the human body and da 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 da. I took a lot of pride in my ability to be a nuanced thinker as it pertained to training. And that just shattered my whole ego about it. And, that was around the time that I quit personal training as well. I stopped coaching CrossFit. I stopped doing all this other stuff because I was like, man, there was just this big piece that I never even considered. And seeing it, I can't go back to teaching people to move in these linear ways and forcing them to force, essentially.
It's interesting stuff what you said there with the yin yang, right? So I have a video on Instagram. I can just describe it. So basically, what you do is you tension as hard as you can, and I'm trying to tension everything in my body, and then I let it go and shake, right? Tension, shake, tension, shake. It's like the yin and the yang. I should be able to produce tension, but I also should be able to completely relax. And that is what I want in movement as well. Like I want to be able to accelerate hard and fast and then just relax in between so I can let the attributes of my body work to their advantage, right? So that's an interesting concept there itself, but the way it's applied to lifting, tension in lifting is rooting into the ground and tensioning your body for long periods of time. That again never happens in movement. It's like it has to be a quick burst. In fact, like if you watch Manny Pacquiao, shadow box or something like that, his feet are tapping so fast, but he is able to get power out of every single one of those taps. And they're tapping at, 0.1 second of each foot touching, right? So you should be able to root, like to him, that's rooting, right? So you should be able to get power out of that by just touching, right? Where most people, because lifting is very long, even short, even Olympic lifting, you're putting force through the ground for a long time. See how he taps. Each one of those taps, he can generate. See that? Wow. He can generate power. Hey? Yeah. Like, I mean, that is not something you're going to learn from lifting. And in fact, it does the opposite in terms of power generation. You're going to be putting power through the ground for too long. Now, is martial arts locomotion? I think it is. I think martial artists have the best locomotion capabilities side to side. Okay. You can argue with me, maybe football players do it in a more dynamic fashion, but they last like 5 years, martial artists, you'll see Pacquiao move like this. If he stops fighting, you'll see him move like this till he's like 70 or 80. And you'll see a lot of, monks able to do these type of lateral motions really fast till they're old, because this is a much better way to do it. If you're not looking for, power and force to another body. If you're looking to harness it within your own body, this is kind of like how I move through the forest when I'm running, right? So I find this to be so fun and allows your body to express mechanics and express fluidity in a much more dynamic fashion without hurting yourself. And to me, this is locomotion.
Well, it is definitely a form of moving through space. And again, like you can see the elastic qualities and how he's, like you said, quickly making that force transfer through the floor. He's not, when you talked about lifting does not teach you this. I remember when you and I found an old video of you and I doing some boxing from ages and ages ago, man, like ages ago. And it was right around the time that I was like peak CrossFit, and I was doing I was like, I'll throw in some boxing because it's, it's dynamic and it'll help my conditioning. And it drove me nuts that I was like, I'm so fucking strong. Why can't I throw a punch with the power and the snap? Like what is it? Like I thought, like I'm accelerating a barbell as fast as I can. I can jerk 240 pounds over my head at like Mach speed. Why can't I throw a punch? I could not figure it out for the life of me.
Yeah, punching itself is a skill, but it's a skill of relaxation. It's a skill of allowing that, because the foot does have to touch the floor for the most part, right? If you want power. So you have to be able to tap the floor, and you have to be able to put it through your hand at Mach speed. And that energy goes through your body, right? So on the flip side, you'll see a lot of boxers who have success being more rooted. Those are the guys that may do well with weightlifting and transfer it into boxing, because they're just standing there and, they'll take hits and they'll just swing, and they do have power, but they have to root it into the ground. Canelo, I know, is starting to do this more and more. I see him being more rooted. His footwork is getting less and less. He's moving from his upper body. His upper body is doing more of the gyro. And he's a counterpuncher, so his attributes of how he boxes, he's able to do this. But a Manny Pacquiao, if he started lifting, he would be in big trouble because his success comes from being able to move. Same with Israel Adesanya, right? Adesanya is very like, it's almost like dance fighting, where he's like, it's very rhythmic. He's moving off everything is the next move. So you'll see him be head over foot quite a bit. Or he's got attributes where his legs are super wide, so he can use that to his advantage. That's another thing. If 2 feet are on the ground, your head can be in the middle. But when 1 foot comes up, you're going to be out of balance. So you have to have that energy going in the right direction, and you have to harness that. So yeah, those are just nuances to the whole, I guess you can say, balance debate and the how to apply force debate. And again, people think force is running forward as fast as you can, or very fast and cutting or juking, but that's just one application. And that's an application in sport. Most of what people are doing is not that. And I think martial arts and dance are really the key for longevity through energy. How do I say this? Like, you move energy through your body, and we haven't even got into stored emotions within the body. Is that a thing? I absolutely believe so, right? So if you're able to dance, if you're able to express yourself, and to me, dance isn't a choreographed hip hop dance that you learn from Drake because you're just copying something, right? If you're able to express whatever you express through your body, whether, whatever it is, whatever you're at, if you're a wallflower, let's say in high school, and you can't move because you're, afraid of looking stupid, then you're going to store up emotions. And that's an expression of stored up emotions because you can't move. But then let's say you're by yourself and you just let it fly, something good's going to come out eventually. And that's kind of like how I learned. I never learned formal dance, and I'm able to dance really well because I just let it fly for a bit. And then, I learned some basic, not trip over your feet stuff, and then just let it fly and let it go. And eventually I became pretty good at it. So I'm able to do it now just because you let the energy flow. So yeah, it's just an aside there.
I think when you brought up the idea of emotions being, well, there are two things actually. The first thing was when you're talking about the longevity of a practice, you were the first person who brought up the idea of looking at elders from different training practices. So you got guys like Ronnie Coleman or Arnold Schwarzenegger, who are the elders of the bodybuilding community, and you can kind of see the effect it has on their body long term. Now, these guys were pumped full of steroids too, so would the effects of a natural bodybuilder in their 80s or their late age, would that be different than someone who's pumped full of tren their entire life? Maybe. You don't know what the degenerative effects of performance enhancing drugs are over the long term. But when you look at people who are again dancers, sometimes there are elderly gymnasts who are able to, depending on the style of gymnastics that they practice. I've seen videos of like a 90-year-old gymnast on the parallel bars, which is really really cool. A lot of the times, the most athletic, or at least like most jacked, the elders who seem to suffer from sarcopenia, the loss of muscle the least, are calisthenic athletes. So whether it's that gymnastics, but you see a lot of old men, these old Russian guys that are still in the park, banging out pull-ups and doing dips and doing their muscle ups and stuff, and they're still, they're doing great. It's just very interesting to see, what are the elders doing? Like, what is the sustainability of your practice based on what's the survival rate of what you're doing, right? You don't see a lot of like power lifters in their 80s. You'll see a lot of the videos, the motivational, inspirational videos of the 80-year-old who's deadlifting 400 pounds, but like, how long have they been doing that? What else have they been doing their entire lives? How fresh are they into powerlifting? I mean, it's not that hard. I hate saying it's not that hard to learn how to lift 400 pounds, but I actually do believe that. Like, if you learn the skill of powerlifting, it's not that hard to progress and have intelligent programming to learn how to deadlift 400 pounds. Probably even, I mean, when I was a personal trainer, I taught a man in his 60s to lift 350 pounds off the floor with perfect form, and it took us 8 months to do, from a like a 185-pound starting point, right? And his strength gains were really, really fast, and there was that innate neurological strength that he was able to tap into because we hit, because it was intelligent programming, right? So starting someone when they're older and having these feats, I'm more interested in the person's like who's been powerlifting since they were 18 and are still doing it when they're 70. Where are those populations? What are they up to? And I know it's like it's funny because even on Instagram, people are like, don't tell me to wait until I'm 30 or 40 or 50 because I'm going to be doing this forever. It's like it's almost like a trope. It's a social media trope at this point. But I do think there is some wisdom in looking at what are the elders doing, what is the longevity of your practice actually teaching you. That was the first thing. In terms of the emotions stored in your body thing, I think this is a fascinating concept because we alluded to a little bit in previous episodes about like physical archetypes based on neurological patterns. I'm going to try and pull up some stuff here too. What just off the top of your head, when you say emotions can get stored in your body, how does that manifest for you? What's your model on that? Is there a place in the body that it stores? Does it store as like a holding pattern? What is your perception of that or your model of that in your mind?
Yeah, I look at it individually, right? I see it as a therapist all the time, but I'll tell you my personal journey with it. As a kid, I could amp up my nervous system a lot, right? Like I could make myself super hyper. I don't know if it was an attribute that I just had naturally. And I would use this before games to be really jittery. And I'd be like, using that energy to go from here, from there. I would always be like on the basketball team. I would play rep basketball and I wouldn't even go to practice because I'd have so many other sports. But my coaches always put me in because of my defensive. Just like I would go so hard, but it was because I could get my nervous system up. So I'd always play super hard defense. Wasn't super skilled. I was decent at it, but not super skilled. So in all the sports I played, I was able to get my nervous system really high. But eventually that became an issue. Eventually I had symptoms and my body was just so tense. Like my muscles were just rocks, right? And now my muscles are loose because I was able to handle that. But it was an advantage at one point in my life. To be able to let that go took a lot. And it took a switch in my mentality to be able to do that. Now my energy was stored everywhere: pelvis, throat, traps, like everywhere. I still feel it today. I still feel that come back to some degree. So it's something I have to be wary of. And I think I've handled it fairly well. But yeah, as a practitioner, like as a chiro, I see people come in all the time and I can just see certain areas that are just holding. It's like low back is a huge one. People just hold tension there, whether it's from your mechanics of where your pelvis is. Certain muscles will hold here, up here near the traps. Almost everybody has something there. The neck. Yeah, it just depends on who you are, right? Like different people will have different areas that they hold tensions in. Let's say a 100-meter sprinter, like a racehorse, you're going to walk around like you're ready to go, you know? So that eventually has implications on your muscles, or not your muscles, your nervous system. So in order to age gracefully, in order to be able to let go, you kind of do have to let go of that and let fluidity through. A 100-meter sprinter would do well with dance where they let go, right? You see the basketball players, like you see Ja Morant, he's going around, he's dancing, he's having that fluidity. Watch him play. He's not doing that hard, tense, I'm going to go, 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 you know? Where some players are like that and they're going to be successful being that high central nervous system successful person. Just like, some players are more successful because they're more muscular in certain sports or heavier in certain sports. Like Mike Tyson, when he boxed, was, very, very tense. And he's like, that's how he had to be in order to express that power. His trainer was like, punch through him, go, you're a tiger, you're a killer, like all that stuff, right? So what do you think's going to carry over afterwards? And he's had his shift now. You can see it, right? Like, but can he bring that into his body is the question. I don't know.
I think that's what you just said. Can he bring that into his body? That is a very, very interesting thing about this idea. Like when you're, I was talking to Adrian Vino on the phone today, and we were talking about like heart guarding, right? When you have like excessively, he was like, I think, I just went through a breakup recently, and he's talking about me doing all these push-ups and having this really tight serratus and having this like really tight area just here. And it's like I don't want to open it up because I'm trying to close my heart off and protect my heart so I can, push through life to get all these things that I want to get done. And from a storytelling perspective, it kind of makes sense. From another perspective, it's like, well, can I just somatically release my body? Is that going to emotionally affect me, or am I still going to have to process the emotions that are associated with it? I think it's I think there's probably a little bit of truth to the fact that, you know, the patterns of emotion and the patterns of holding in the body are related, but they can also be healed separately. Like you said, is Mike Tyson going to be able to, like, he might have a mental shift, but is he still going to be like this? Is he still going to be ready to just square up, right? Is he still going to have that tension, that ability to just pow? And is that somatic tension, is that readiness, is that nervous system pattern, is that going to affect his mental pattern or his emotional patterning? I think it will ultimately,
Mhm.
right? And so I think part of a certain level of emotional healing. I don't know how much, me stretching my pecs and opening up my lats are going to help with, whatever heartache I experienced in my personal life. But I do know that, sitting like, I do know that posture also affects expression of neurotransmitters and hormones, right? Like if you have a certain posture, you will express even your sex hormones in a different way, right? Like if you have like a stooped over posture and you make yourself really small, you can have lower testosterone than if you're upright and you're proud and you're taking up space. There's a neural feedback that happens based on your posture. So absolutely, there's 100%. Like if you're saying that there's no such thing, I saw, no bullshit physio had a big long post debunking the idea that emotions are stored in the fascial tissue. And I think he was kind of going after human garage, right? He had a very logical approach as to why there might be simpler explanations to the idea of, trauma stored in your fascia. And I thought it was a reasonable post. Even like, usually I kind of roll my eyes at some of the stuff because he's so overly dismissive, but I don't think that it's wise to dismiss the idea that your body and how your body holds itself and your emotions are somehow separate, or the disconnect between your mind and body. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I actually go farther with that. Like the neurotransmitters, the hormones, that all that stuff is what science can quantify.
Hmm.
I'm going with resonance. I'm going with vibration, frequency, stuff that isn't so well quantified. I'm going to make a leap of faith,
Hmm.
not in science, but in how I believe the world to work, and or the spirit of the body. And I'm going to say that if you can harness higher energies, let's say, I'm going to give you a specific example. Let's say you weren't mature at all and you just had a breakup and you're harnessing anger and you don't know how to breathe. You don't know how to breathe your way out of it. That's going to definitely store up. Okay. And it's going to make your digestion poor. It's going to like literally physically, um, I don't know how angry some people can get, but when you're angry and everything tightens up, repeat that 100 times and then see what happens to your digestion, what happens to the actual physical space of the cavity of your ribs, even, right? Like, let's just go with that, a physical manifestation. Repeat that 100 times and tell me that there's not going to be an issue. Versus if you're mature, if you've handled it, you can hit the next level. You can get those emotions more handled than before because you're able to breathe your way through it. You're able to get to a higher resonance, a higher frequency. Versus anger, it's going to be more, okay, I can harness this anger for creativity, and then I'm going to move on and do something else. I may still have the anger, but I can channel it into a different energy and not store it within my tissues. I would go so far as to say if someone doesn't believe in this sort of thing, they may be harboring tensions within their own fascia. You know what I mean? Like you may be actually harboring tensions in yourself because it makes sense to me on both a spiritual and logical level. And being the debunker of everything through science, which has the lens that is about this big, You know, it doesn't work very well for, I'm going to say spirituality, but again, a lot of the scientists don't believe in that sort of thing because you can't quantify it in the way that they want it quantified. Okay, so
I'm going to bring it back to actually like the even just from a pure physiological perspective, right? I was really fascinated by. Do you know who Dr. Joe Dispenza is?
yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
he got me thinking of the idea that thoughts have a physiological process behind them, right? And so obviously, like our understanding is that neurons fire and wire a particular way, but there's also there's neurochemical effect that happens in there too, and we are affected by neurochemistry. And one of the things that we know about the human body is that it strives to reach a point of homeostasis at any given point, and that's why drug addicts who, when they go cold turkey, if they've been taking massive amounts of drugs for a long time, they can actually die if they just stop taking drugs completely, because their body's homeostasis is now dependent on this drug. In the same way, if you repeat certain thought patterns over and over and over again, you can have a neurochemical homeostasis that is correspondent with that neurochemical response of that type of thought. So that's why you get people who are, negative thinkers who get in these negative thought patterns over and over. It's actually very difficult for them to adopt a positive view of life because their homeostasis neurochemically is dependent on the neurochemical environment produced by negative thoughts or anxiety. This is where, I talked to a friend who I said, I think you're addicted to cortisol. Like, what the hell do you mean? It's like, well, you're always stressed, you're always buzzing, you're always running on this stress metabolism, and every time you try to relax, it stresses you out even more because your body, its homeostatic chemical environment is dependent on a set level of cortisol. And when you don't have that cortisol, you crash, you freak out, you panic, you have this issue where you're dependent on a set level of cortisol in your system. So I think, again, the idea that there's no physiological correspondence, the disconnect between mind and body, is just the stupidest thing in the world to me. Like, it's like, of course the mind and the mind and body are just the same thing to me. It's a continuum. But there is actually, I like that idea to me, that in order to change your identity and change your thought patterns, you actually have to get used to a different neurochemical homeostasis, that your body will physiologically fight you in changing your personal identity because you're used to getting this homeostasis in terms of your thoughts. Even that was really fascinating to me, and that really helped because I was like, oh, I've quit drugs before. I know what the process is. I've quit coffee, I've quit weed, I've quit, nicotine, I've quit all these things. And I went through the withdrawal process and I knew how uncomfortable it was, but then I reached my new level of homeostasis. I was able to express myself in a different way. Why is it different with thoughts? Why is it different with behaviors? Why is it different with any of this stuff where I'm trying to create a new homeostasis for myself?
All that makes sense logically to me, right? Like all that, even the neurochemical aspect of it, that can be quantified too. Like you do see that, cortisol is one that you mentioned. Dopamine's one that you mentioned. That's where the scientists want to go with it. I'm talking frequency, resonance,
Yeah.
uh, you know, um, fields. Okay. So you're like, is there such a thing as fields around your body, a magnetic resonance around your body? Let's say, you've seen those memes where I'm not sure if they're memes or animations or, even cameras that can detect infrared when you're in love versus when you're in anger. You can't tell me that when somebody walks into a room and he's angry, is it different than someone walks in is just happy in love? Like it is, you can feel the difference. It's a palpable difference. Is that happening at a neurochemical level? No, I think there's a resonance and frequency behind a person's essence, spirit. I don't care if science can't quantify it. It doesn't matter. It exists and people can feel it all over the world. Almost everybody who's not a complete science cuck can feel this type of stuff where you can feel resonances from bodies. Okay, so it's an interesting thing because you can't really quantify it, right? So
No, you absolutely can't.
yeah,
What you're talking about, like the vibes and the resonance and the energy of different people, like it's absolutely a thing, right? Like you can even tell, the vibes were off, the resonance is off. Can you just keep going? I'm just going to answer my door here real quick. I'll be right back.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, so um, yeah, pivoting off what I was saying before with the feeling of different essences of people. Yeah, again, you can even going to a nightclub, which I used to do all the time, I don't know if people do it anymore, or a restaurant, you can look at a table and you can see the vibration of the table. If people are just sitting there and their face is straight, even without watching them physically, you can feel the vibe of a certain place. A wedding is different than a rock concert, that's different from a symphony, that's different from a jail, right? Like you're going to see different resonances happen. And it is beyond measure that we know science can do. Okay. So even if you don't believe this type of thing, you're feeling it. So that's all I have to say about that. And I'm sure we're going to get back to this because I love this topic, but
Yeah,
it's
well,
kind of beyond the movement realm, right?
it is and it isn't. I mean, it's all everything is interconnected. And even before we started the Art of Move, we had like 4 episodes of a podcast about levels of energy and talking about this exact topic. Like,
Yeah,
that was our original podcast idea, was basing it off levels of energy. I still have levels of energy on my bookshelf over there where it talks about this exact concept, and we had some good episodes that were pre-recorded.
oh, those are really good. We should release them at some point.
I know. I'll try to find them.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting for people to see. Kind of go back on that. That wavelength. And I think, in terms of, we have some episodes. I got some really great feedback. Some people have really, really appreciated those philosophy of science episodes. Some of the more abstract stuff that when you're the thing about listening to a podcast about movement and about the body is that your body and movement needs to be experienced experientially. It needs to be experienced. You could just put a period at the end of that. It's not something that you can spend all your time conceptualizing. It's not something that you can spend all your time on Instagram looking at and watching. Maybe even looking at it and watching it is even better than listening to us talk about ideas about movement, because at least then maybe you're seeing it and maybe some of your mirror neurons are going to fire off and you can have like a simulated experience of what it would feel like. But ultimately, you need to experience movement in order to know what movement is. So for those of you who are listening, go fucking move, first of all. But when we're talking about things like the philosophy of science, right? We're trying to improve the quality of critical thinking. We're trying to improve the quality of people coming to different versions of truth, because between critical thinking, between the scientific process, and between the actual experiential reality of moving itself, you are going to get to deeper layers of understanding about how your body operates and how to best move through space. That's the real goal here. Even though we say we're trying to find the grand unified theory behind movement, movement isn't a theory. Movement is movement.
Exactly. And movement is, I was just going to add one more thing. It's the expression of movement is where you're at. It can be where you're at emotionally at the time. If you're very rigid in your movement, if you're only wanting to move one way, that is a expression of where you're at emotionally, mentally, physically. Okay. So when I was more stuck in my mentality, I'd want to do those heavy lifts up and down in one plane. And when I did that, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? It's just where you're at is where you're at. When I'm moving more freely, my brain is more free, and vice versa, right? So I just wanted to add that, and I do have to go. So
all right. So that is episode, I believe, 79. Thank you so much for listening to The Art of Move, guys. We appreciate the people who have watched live on nofilter.net. Thank you for watching it. Leave us a comment what you thought of this episode. If you agreed, disagreed, follow me at The Body Moves on Instagram, Will at The Art of Move. We'll catch you on the next episode of the podcast, guys. Thank you so much for watching.
Have a good one, guys. Gil Headley Friday. Huge episode.
Yeah. 12:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We'll see you there.
All right.